Welcome back. You're in the C Space Studio here at CES 2023. I am James Kotecki. We are sponsored this year by Integral Ad Science, and I am so happy to be bringing you this conversation with Andrew Casale, President and CEO, Index Exchange. Thanks for joining us so much.
Thanks for having me.
Really appreciate it. Index Exchange, how do you define the brand here in 2024? What does it mean?
We are efficiency, fundamentally. Our role is to support media companies, so just about every media company on the planet is a customer of Index Exchange. We support them on the web and app, increasingly in streaming television, and connecting them to programmatic budgets that exist in our vast ecosystem.
Yeah, and so what are you looking to do here in the near term? I mean, you're here at CES, this is kind of the kickoff event to the year. What are some of the conversations or opportunities that you're exploring and excited about right now?
Yeah, there's two big themes, even just a day into CES already, that are definitely propping up. The first being, this is going to be what I think will be likely referred to as a programmatic election in a big way. Streaming adoption is at a fever pitch. Political advertisers are quite comfortable leveraging the programmatic channel, and there's just going to be so much budget directed to a small number of battleground states.
Yeah.
There's so much attention being put into how media companies can maximize that opportunity. So that'll be one thematic. The second thematic that I think everybody's talking about is this is likely to be the last year of the third-party cookie.
Yeah.
Everyone has their own strategy on how they're approaching that, but lots of conversations on both topics.
So I want to dive into both topics, and let's start with the election. It's an interesting way to think about the evolution of advertising and technology in four-year increments. We have these conversations in the C Space Studio every year.
Yeah.
Obviously, things keep evolving, and obviously there's more than just the presidential election every 4 years. Sure. But it's a good way to kind of check in, because that obviously is the big one, right?
Yeah.
And so you mentioned that folks are very comfortable with programmatic advertising. Are there fundamental changes that we see here in 2024, that things that weren't true in 2020 that people should be expecting and looking for?
The big one is the rapid surge in consumer adoption of streaming in the last 4 years. So we had a bit of it from the pandemic in the 2020 election, but the last few years, it's unbelievable how much more consumer adoption, vast streaming platforms, all the OEM platforms as well. And so the sheer scale of access to the consumer is like nothing we've ever seen, and it's completely accessible through programmatic platforms, meaning the precision of addressability, measurement, optimization, the ability to really zero into some of the battleground states. We're hearing even 10 months out, 11 months out, triple-digit CPMs for very, very coveted audiences and regions, things that just 4 years ago we were not hearing at all.
And so, I mean, if we zoom out, what that means is increased precision targeting, right?
Yeah.
So in the past, people might have expected to see political advertisement when they turn on the TV. Now, if they might be in a battleground state, but they might not be the kind of person that is deemed a persuadable voter.
Right.
So they may have a completely different election experience than their neighbor across the street.
Absolutely. And so then as a result, if you think of what underpins programmatic, there's an auction, there's a fundamental auction. You now have a dynamic where the auction dynamic will compel parties to bid each other up, which is really good for the media company who's ultimately trying to fund content. And the business of media in general and journalism has never been harder. So this is going to be a groundswell for them. But significant change likely to the consumer experience year over year as well.
And I don't know if you're going to, if you personally or you as a company get into this, but obviously the way that these ads can now be generated through Gen AI and the potential for all the kinds of concerns that we're all familiar with going into an election year for misinformation and disinformation. That's all, I mean, obviously it's wrapped up in this because things can be programmatically plugged into shows, and they can now be increasingly programmatically generated by Gen AI.
That is a huge topic, and it has many different shades. The way we approach it, for starters, it's a huge topic to us as a company because we sit between the bid and the creative and the ultimate media company. So it's an area that we're ultimately responsible for. We find that there's varying strategies depending on our customer to combat the potential risks that this will create. One being, there is an extreme. There are media companies who are not running any political ads at all, and they're leaving the money on the table, but they do not want the risk. On the other extreme, there are media companies that want to review every single creative one by one.
Manually.
So if they're, literally, manually. Yeah. So if there's 1,000 permutations, before any one of them can run, a human on their team will need to have screened each one based on their own standards before any dollars can transact.
Yeah.
And so for us, we have to navigate this, and every media company has their own risk tolerance, but you're absolutely correct. This is a whole new paradigm, and there will likely be occurrences of generative AI and different ad experiences potentially, doing interesting things that everyone needs to be on top of.
When we talk next year at this time, it's going to be we're going to have some stories to tell.
There will be stories,
I'm
for
sure.
sure. Hopefully not many, and certainly none from us, but there will absolutely be stories.
We want to talk about cookies, as you mentioned. So I think it might be helpful to kind of step back and define for folks who are watching kind of what happened. So I think people may be aware that in the relatively recent past, people started to have to opt in to be tracked by every single website that they visit that was using cookies. And so can you remind folks how much of this is being driven by legislative regulatory issues, and then how much of what practically is happening is also just companies making choices on top of that?
Right. So it's a little bit of both. There is no federal privacy law, at least in the United States. So I wouldn't say that it is strictly being driven by regulatory, initiatives or mandates. But that is likely to come inevitably. But for the most part, this is a form of self-regulation that big tech is imposing upon itself. We really saw this start years back with Apple. Apple clamped down the cookie in its ecosystem, the third-party cookie specifically, because it could be used to create a profile of a consumer and track consumers with or without transparency, which is obviously a huge concern, with or without control, which is obviously a huge concern. So this year, the big event is Google is effectively following suit by removing the ability for third-party cookies to be set on browsers. So about a decade later, but their solution to this is something called the Privacy Sandbox, which is intended to allow the preservation of addressability, targeting basically the things that allow ads to work better for the marketer, while also putting the consumer in charge. So doing things like requiring cohorts so that you can't infinitely target somebody to a level of specificity that is just uncomfortable or creepy, as well as far more transparency and control to the end consumer. So removing the cookie, but replacing it with tools that still allow advertising to be performant.
And you mentioned there's a lot of conversations around this, a lot of strategies and thoughts about how to proceed in this world. It'd be nice to use you as a barometer then. So what's the emotion then? Are people worried about a doomsday scenario? Are people blasé about it? Are people somewhere in between?
The honest truth is a little bit of both. Our ecosystem in general isn't known for being overly proactive when it comes to even events that are perceived to be doomsish. I would say that the cookie event is only going to impact opportunities on the web, which does not represent every single media company on the planet, but certainly many have huge presences and scale on the web. That said, if you look to an event that happened in Europe in 2018, we had the GDPR go into effect. There was 5 years of notice on that, maybe more. And it went into effect in May of 2018, and most of the prep actually happened, and admittedly on behalf of our customers, in May of 2018, with 5 years notice. So what I would say to you is there is a lack of proactive efforts in place right now to be ready for this cookie doomsday fear, but there's also a lot of optimism. There's testing going on right now with the Privacy Sandbox. Many of our customers are currently implementing the APIs that Google has made available to start to see what addressability will look like in this new paradigm. It's January, which is better than December, but it's still not particularly proactive.
Well, if you go back in time and tell someone around the era of like Y2K that 2024 is the year of the cookie doomsday scenario, I'm not sure they would know what kind of future they were getting themselves into.
Or what the hell a cookie is.
Exactly. Actually, I think someone earlier in the C Space Studio today said cookies are 30 years old, maybe.
That sounds about right.
I'm not sure how if they've been pervasive for that amount of time, and someone can go back and check the tape and see if I'm actually repeating that information accurately.
30 years feels about right, yeah.
Are there other technology trends that you're looking at? We're here at CES, obviously, which is a show not just about marketing, media, branding, and advertising, but technology writ large, all the different devices that this content could be streamed on. Any other technology trends that you're kind of picking up here?
Honestly, it's all television for me personally, and just the way smart TV has completely changed the game. Even some of the solutions that the LGs and the Samsungs of the world are bringing to market, where the consumer can seamlessly basically fuse into streaming television without even realizing it. It feels like a linear stream, but it's a connected television channel, which puts them in control, which gives them the ability to choose their content, which also activates the ecosystem at large. It's pretty incredible how fast that's changed, because television as we know it is literally changing before our eyes. Smart TVs are ubiquitous. The sticks that you can plug into even your older TV are also ubiquitous. So that one is still very much top of mind for me.
Well, thanks so much for joining us here in the C Space Studio today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Andrew Casale, Index Exchange. I am James Kotecki of the C Space Studio here at CES 2024. You're watching conversations with marketing, media, advertising, and branding leaders. We will continue to be live and bring you more great conversations. Don't go anywhere.